You are listening to Spilling the Tea, a real estate podcast with Kristy Macero and Shelagh Maycheck.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Spilling the Tea, a real estate podcast with your hosts, myself, Kristy, and Shelagh Maycheck.
Hello.
Today, Spilling the Tea with us is, does he own too many pugs? Mortgage advisor Alex McFadyen.
I should add that to everything.
Yes. I think you should.
Everything. Yes.
I'm not sure if your wife is featured after or before, but I did a segment with your wife about animals and real estate, and I have a very short story about your pug.
By the way, we arm wrestled over that because I was going to come in and do that, and she beat me.
The animal one?
That's why I'm here.
Yeah.
She was going to come do the mortgage as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And thought about bringing all the pugs. Anyways, continue.
So I was at your house recently, and it was pretty busy. It was pretty loud in there. It was New Year's Eve, and we were having a really good time. And your wife turned to me, and your pug Ernie, who is ancient, old, kind of stumbling up, like can't see, can't hear, and Sarah looks at me and she goes, "Do you think Ernie's okay, Kristy?" And
she said that to you?
Yeah, she did. Oh. And I answered, "No, Sarah, I think Ernie questions why he's alive every day." and I'm just telling her straight up, like, "No, Sarah, like I feel like Ernie questions his existence every day that he's on the planet." And then she goes, "Oh, I was just wondering if you thought he needed to go outside or not." And I was mortified. And I guess you had asked her, "Does Ernie need to go out?" And she just turned and asked me like, "Oh, Kristy, do you think Ernie needs to go? Or how do you think Ernie is or whatever?" And it was very embarrassing.
Well, the good news is Ernie's still here, and the level of motivation for food is very high. So I think that he only questions why he doesn't eat more food.
Oh my gosh, it was so funny. Like, he's obviously old. I was surprised he was still able to get outside and use the washroom all on his own, and didn't get lost anywhere. So he's fine.
Yeah.
Very motivated.
So he's fine, Kristy.
He's fine. Yeah, but I thought, I was like, she's asking me.
You're like, "Kate, here's my opinion on it."
You know Ernie's our baby, right?
I do. I thought she was really asking me, but she wasn't. Anyways, now you know. Okay, so moving on.
Well, okay, so for the video audience, if there is one, we're definitely going to flash Ernie in his finest that moment.
We'll put Ernie on the screen for sure. I want like the oldest, crustiest photo of him, though. Nothing young.
It's all the photos of Ernie now.
Yeah. Okay, so this episode, April, right? Let's talk about it. Legislation regarding grow-ops. It was legalized on October 17th, 2018. And Alex, I wanted you here today because we're going to get into a little bit later, like what banks actually think about grow-ops. Everybody knows that the government allows the 4 plants, but what if there's 3? What if there's 2? What if the bank finds out about it? And that's something that we're going to get into in a little bit because these are conversations that should have happened when it was legalized, and it wasn't.
The answers may shock you.
Yeah, the answers will shock you. Hang on. And how does this affect real estate? Mm-hmm. And how does this affect financing?
Are you saying there's a disconnect between the government and...
Just a small one.
Yeah, okay. Just making sure.
But I love that because that's what we're going to get into because there is the disconnect and everyone thought, "Oh, great, yes, let's legalize it." But there's some issues with that. And then kind of your personal opinions on, there's the recreational users, there's the commercial users, there's residential grows, there's reload houses, which if anyone's not in the first responder world is a term that they use for where illegal substances are manufactured. There could be firearms, weapons, like that's where drug dealers come back, get loaded up for their shift, and out they go. Okay, kind of like the Costco of drug dealing. All right, that would be like a reload house. There's a membership and everything. No, I'm just kidding.
Drug co.
We're funny tonight.
Yeah.
Okay, so to me, there's a big difference between them on like an ethics level, especially when it comes to selling. Mm-hmm. And I don't use it, so I've never smoked anything, not even fish. Yep, you got me in my full powers tonight.
I gotta fish.
Fish. I don't smoke anything. I've never smoked anything.
There's got to be a story behind that.
No, I don't smoke anything.
Okay,
I
don't smoke a fish.
No,
don't start there.
Not even for food.
It's a gateway.
It's a gateway fish.
Yeah.
But I can speak to how it affects us in our workplace, because it does. Even regardless as to your personal opinion about whether or not it should be legalized or used or anything like that, there is real estate and marijuana issues that arise, and that's what we're here to talk about today. So before we do that, before we get into spilling all that delicious tea, or not delicious tea, depending on your opinion, Shelagh, what do you think? Is a grow just a grow?
There's so much variety, and people don't understand this until you kind of start a conversation about it, and they go, oh, wow. But between what the banks consider a grow and insurance and realtors and the government, it's not all... No one's on the same page.
No.
So it's just a conversation we need to have.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. And there's different levels of grow, like you said. Mm-hmm. We had a client purchase a grow-up home once upon a time. And I mean, the house was like 15, 20 years old by this point. The seller at one point in the very early stages of purchasing this home decided for whatever reason that they were going to rent it out. And they moved out and they drove past it just to check it out because it was their rental. And sure enough, at the bottom of the driveway, there was boxes full of lighting equipment and electrical cords, and they thought, well, that's kind of strange. And then they drove past again and they looked up at the window and you could see kind of taped off cellophane kind of wrap, like sheeting. And so they were like, something's going on here. So they asked to do a walkthrough, and believe it or not, I guess the renters had taken bags and bags of soil, and they covered the whole living room with the soil, and they were starting their grow. Nothing ever got done because she caught it so quickly. But then 15 years later, when she's about to, and apparently she called the police and was like getting these guys out and had to go through an eviction process and all the rest of it. And so she was able to save her home before any major damage occurred. They did mold testing. They did everything they could. So it came time for a buyer to come along, which was my client. We knew that was disclosed to us. And, it was in the documentation on prior listings. So ultimately there's a paper trail behind it. They still opted to purchase it because now they're buying it at a reduced rate, knowing that they're going to have to sell it for a reduced rate in the future. Mm-hmm. But it very much was not a stereotypical, this mold will hurt you grow anymore. It was a lovely family home. It was clean. It was well looked after. And that element of grow that had happened so long before, it was now gone. So that's kind of one situation. But say, and the interesting part about it was the most recent listing that was listed, it didn't actually say anything about the grow. We went in, we viewed it, we said we were going to write an offer. Yeah. And then I got a phone call from the agent. And I was like, why did you just waste my time? Why did we just drive all the way out there to find out that this was a grow?
Yeah.
Because we're always told when we start real estate, don't ever have your clients buy a grow. Mm-hmm. I know lots of people that have bought grows before.
Maybe they just found out 10 seconds previously.
Oh my goodness.
I doubt it.
Yeah. So I was kind of choked, and he goes, well, here's the information. We just want to disclose it to you, but it's up to you if you forward it on to financing or not, which is kind of an interesting conversation. Huh. So yeah, so it's just interesting. And I've seen other properties where you get this big house. Not good. Well, like Mission, for example, there's a lot of properties where you get a big house and then they've got a shed. Mm-hmm. Now the shed is not in the house. Yeah. But when it's a grow, unfortunately, and it can live with the land. So here to chat grow financing, or just financing in general.
Specific.
So that you can get financing
set the record straight
on
here.
your grow. Yeah. So to talk mortgages with us is Alex McFadyen. Alex, you've been in the mortgage game for how long now?
Well, I got it. Before we start here, we didn't talk about the pugs. We just talked about Ernie.
We can talk about them all.
We got to get the whole.
Okay, we got to get the pugs out of the way first.
No. We can start off and we'll get back to pugs.
Okay. We'll come back.
It's only my second favorite topic.
We'll come back to pugs at the end.
Yeah.
Deal. So I got licensed in 2011. Yeah. Believe it, shockingly, it's been that long.
Yeah.
There's been journeys and so forth, but I've been doing this for a minute. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, so you've seen some things, you would say.
Seen things.
Okay.
Yeah, heard things, all sorts of things.
Okay.
Lots happening.
Okay.
Shockingly.
So if you have a client and they're looking to purchase, and in the documents that they're coming across, whether it's a property disclosure statement or additional documents saying, hey, listen, there's a grow, what happens? What's the first thing you start getting into?
Well, to your point, I mean, I hope we heard about it before it gets to that point. Yeah. And for a listener, maybe who's not in the real estate industry, the property property disclosure statement is usually something we see when they've accepted an offer on a home.
Like after the fact, correct? Yeah.
Exactly. So normally, I'd say 100% of the time, I'll usually get a phone call saying, I'm looking at this grow-up property. Right. And
before they write.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So before they view it, they're already kind of throwing the ball towards you. Okay.
Or they viewed it and they said, Alex, I want to buy this place, but. And then the but usually follows a variety of exciting things.
You're like, no more buts. Just stop there. Stop talking.
There's soil on the ground. I'm not sure about it, but maybe I should. No. The grow thing is definitely something that it comes up, and it usually comes up early in the conversation. Interesting note about that is that I would suggest that recently, last 2-3 years, I've almost never get that call. Almost never. And I don't know if that's because people just naturally think that, okay, pot's legal, I don't got to tell anybody anymore, which we can talk about, or if maybe it's just less frequent that this change. I don't know. Don't know why, but it's not happening as often now as it did, 3 years ago, for that matter.
Okay, interesting. That's okay. Okay, that's strange because I would think, I know some areas like you kind of go through and there's kind of more houses than others, so and people, they do come to you and they do want financing on these homes, so what's the kind of protocol after that?
You always start off by understanding the situation and reminding and explaining to people exactly what you said. It doesn't matter if it's 1 plant or 50 plants, it's all the same in the eyes of a bank or a lender. They don't care. As soon as there's been a situation where it's been uncovered or discovered, if you will, that there's been a grow up, there's been a plant, multiple plants, shed or otherwise, it's all the same. Hey, baby, this is a grow up now, right? So the feedback I provide people is just exactly to start off with your point. This is now something that has to be disclosed and you have to carry forward. This is the impact to your value. And for people who don't know, the value impact is, in many cases, pretty big.
It is.
It's kind of like, it's more pronounced in a lower market than in a higher market. So when it's a hot market, we see these properties selling typically more frequently or coming on the market because, someone who might have thought I've lost value could get a lot more for it at that point.
Like, now's the time.
Exactly. And there's less inventory. They're typically selling at those times. But in a lower, medium, regular market, you're just not seeing them as frequently. So it's a good conversation about property value. Is this worth 10% less because of this, or is it 15%? There's not an exact amount, so you can't quantify it that way, but you know that, right? And then the conversation is, okay, well, you have to understand your client's future goals. Is this the type of person that's just going to move in, live there, and retire for 30 years? Okay. Well, if you're not the kind of person that's going to be reaching out to me in a year or 2 years to renegotiate your interest rate or access your equity or take out money for your kids or something like that, hey, maybe there's a good play here for you because it's a home, it's a house to live, and if your cost makes sense, it makes sense.
Because you can always buy it for lower, but then ride it out, and then you end up selling it for lower, or maybe legislation changes in the future and they wipe it clear. You never know.
Yeah, that, and like from a lending perspective, again, this is actually kind of surprising. There haven't been more lenders that have come to the table and said we'll finance these properties. In the last 10 years, there are less lenders.
Interesting.
And they're more restrictive. There are lenders who will finance them. There's no doubt about that. But it's not like it's moved in a more positive direction where the cost is better for the borrower. But you could suggest that someone might think that 10 years down the road.
Right.
If obviously the guidelines change or if the banks become more lenient, which could happen.
Yeah. So when legislation was passed and suddenly everyone's like, oh, great, we can grow 4 plants in our house. And I'm like, pump the brakes, because the bank views it as a grow, even if it's legal. But on our property disclosure statements that we had, it says,
it's worded carefully.
It's very careful. It says,
other than as permitted by law.
Yeah. Is a home used to manufacture illegal substances or grow other than as permitted by law?
Yeah.
So you would assume that as permitted by law is up to 4 plants. So if you are growing 4 plants, then it doesn't need to be disclosed based on that wording, from what I'm hearing from you. And I think I have a theory that's what's happening is because I will say I know people who grow their minimal amount, just normal people growing 2 or 3 plants for personal use sort of situation. And I doubt they disclose that, nor do I think they would even think about that. So I don't think it's a situation where they're like, oh, I'm going to not tell somebody or I'm going to tell somebody. I think it's a situation, government says I can do this, so I'm going to do this. I'm not breaking the law. And so my theory is that's a big reason why we're seeing less of it. In the past, as you know, in many circumstances, obviously the primary issue was probably those big grow-ups, those reload houses.
The 90s grow-up. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, so say the bank so say the bank gets the paperwork and stuff, and there's an appraisal needed, which appraisals happen.
Yeah.
And the appraiser walks through the property and they see 3 plants or 2 plants because regular Joe Blow's just enjoying his Saturday nights. Does the appraisal person, do you know if they report that back?
I mean, yeah, if there's a photo of a plant, it's going to show up. And if a bank is actually reviewing their appraisal, which they do, I'm sure that the person who's reviewing it is likely to see that. I mean, there's no guarantees. They're human. But if they see that, then it'll be a red flag. Okay, well, there's a marijuana plant in, the kid's bedroom closet.
Hopefully not.
I don't know why I should probably ask why the appraiser is getting into the kid's closet. That's kind of weird. But
for me, photography and a lot of real estate, they'll take certain pictures so that, you can't see the giant power tower in the backyard. So say the photos look good and then that appraiser physically shows up in the house and they go into a room that has a couple plants.
They're just right out there.
Yeah. And
well, I mean, that's definitely going to have an impact on their financing. Right
okay.
away. Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know. That was the question. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so that just goes to show you if you have a personal collection at home and you're going to be listing your house, you got to move those suckers. Maybe somebody babysits and takes care of your babies while you're selling.
As long as they are still under the legal allowable limit in your household.
Disclaimer.
Good disclaimer. Look at that.
Disclaimer.
Oh boy. Word.
Yes. Don't babysit for too many friends' plants.
No, not too many friends
I think
one
like
time.
the thing about the appraisal thing is an interesting point. I've seen some really weird things in appraisals that I probably shouldn't talk about, but I've never seen that. And I think that a big part of that is to your point that typically speaking, an appraiser is not going looking for things. An appraiser is there to appraise the value of the home. Like, okay, is there a giant hole in the wall? I'm going to take a photo of that, right? It's right in my face. Is there a pot plant hanging from the ceiling? Okay, yeah, that's probably going to be something I might think about. But if that's not the case, if we're talking about closets or typically it is probably in a darker area, I would imagine, or something like that. In that case, you're probably in a situation where they're just not going to see it. So it doesn't matter.
Okay, so discretion, be discreet, okay.
Be discreet, hide your plants.
Be discreet, hide your plants.
There you go.
Okay, so with like on our side of the coin, when we are listing somebody's home, we had a seller once that had a beautiful property and it was nice and big, and all these homes were like BC boxes with detached garages, and it was a whole bunch of them. And so he wanted us to list his home, and he's like, we're sitting outside one day and he's showing us his new deck that he built. It was beautiful. And he sits there and he goes, can you smell it? And I'm like, smell what?
Smell what? What are we smelling?
We're outside. So I'm nervous now. He's like, next door. Can you tell? And I'm like, I don't know what's happening. So I'm like, no. And he's like, yeah. He goes, that big shed right there. And he points and there's this big monstrosity in the back. He goes, that's a legal grow up. It's huge. And I'm like, oh my God. And I'm sitting there going like, okay, not my client's property, so I don't have to worry there. But now I'm going to be responsible for putting up this person's house and selling this house to probably a nice family, knowing that there is a grow op next door. And like, I'm a pretty ethical girl when it comes to that kind of stuff about safety. Because even when we were talking before about, say your client wants to purchase the home, I don't think financing first thing. The first thing I think of is, okay, is it safe? And some of the things that I think about, not only about mold, I don't care about the mold, find the mold, whatever. But I think, is it criminal activity?
Like, is it going to be targeted?
What about grow rips, where grow ops get they get home invaded, for lack of a better term, or you see houses that get shot at, or you see that kind of stuff where these grow rips occur on what they call reload houses. And in my head, I'm like, okay, is that a dangerous situation? Is that a dangerous next door property? Is that something where that would not be okay?
Yeah.
And I take this kind of stuff to heart. When I was young, there's something called the Surrey Six murders. That was a couple people that I went to high school with. So drug dealing and the dangers of that, definitely resonate huge with me. So I take these things into account very seriously when I'm thinking about putting families in proximity to certain activities, right? So I asked him, because in my heart I could feel, I don't know if this is sitting right with me. So I said to him, who lives next door?
Yeah.
And he said, this really nice family with their kids. Yeah. And I looked over and there's a play set in the backyard and a swimming pool in the front yard, and the kids are running through the sprinkler. And it was just this really nice family. And that just happens to be what they were into
just
on an
unconventional family legal business.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On the agricultural level.
Yeah.
So some people grow tomato plants, some people don't. So I was okay listing the property. Mm-hmm. Now, I didn't have to disclose that there was a grow up next door, of course, because that's none of my business to disclose. But I also told my seller, I'm not going to lie. If somebody asks me, I'm not going to lie. He can instruct me that not to comment, and that's fine.
Because we have to follow their legal instruction.
Yes. And so his legal instruction was like, hey, like, don't point it out. But if somebody asks you about it, they're asking you about it. So I said, okay. And I said, but you think that this is safe? And he goes, yeah. He goes, they're really nice people. It's nice and quiet. It's all very, very professional. But you can smell it every once in a while. So I said, okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we ended up listing the house, but I had to have that conversation because if it was a situation where he goes, no, Kristy, there's cars coming and going all the time.
Like we're moving because we don't like it there anymore.
Activity all the time in the house. Like, is that somewhere where I want to set up and do an open house? Probably not.
Yeah. It's an interesting point about this, or why he knew that, or was it the smell, or what was going on? Because my theory is that the use of it is probably more annoying, and I use the word annoying, no different than a cigarette. I mean, I personally don't care if it's someone smoking a cigarette or a joint beside me. It's all annoying. You know, it's kind of invading my space.
Like a nuisance smell.
Yeah. And so I've had, lived in condos before where our neighbors used all day, every day, every kind of smoke, cigarette, cigars, pot, whatever, all that kind of stuff. And that was more of an annoyance than I would say, just grow it and sell it. I don't care. Just don't smoke it there. You know what I mean? So it's an interesting point on that front. And I it's funny because I actually have clients that, or have businesses in this industry, and nicest people you ever meet, like, very good humans, very ethical, very strong, I guess moral values, but they look at this as a normal consideration.
Of course, and medicinal.
Way, right?
Like, there's medicinal people, and this is what they use for whether it's pain management or whatever, anxiety management or whatever. And I don't use, but I can't comment to say it's great or not great. It's just not something I'm into, and I don't judge that harshly if people are using or not. It's just
so that's where it becomes continuously more interesting about why the lenders haven't adapted to that piece, right? So.
Right. Yeah. Because if the government says it's okay.
Yeah, and there's no clear guidelines where they all talk to each other for documentation or remediation.
Oh, yes.
Like, there's no clear structure or a national guideline saying, here's all the boxes you have to tick for us to put a stamp of approval that this is safe forever now and we can take it off title. It's kind of depends on each municipality and township.
Yes.
So there's an interesting point around that. So speaking about the lending piece, which I don't know if I'm skipping ahead here, but
no, you're
talking about lenders in general, the lenders that are most likely to finance these properties are not federally regulated lenders. Typically, you'll find credit unions to be the most open to using, or to not using, to maybe they do use a lot more. They're really friendly in the branches, right? Credit union guidelines are a lot more open towards any type of property that's had a grow up, or even like a couple, whatever. They don't really care. It's just it is or it isn't. You know what I mean? We also see a lot of like subprime alternative lending situations, which rates are not nearly as high as what people think. Nonetheless, a lot of alternative lenders, but the big five banks are not. In the past, they would be open to it. But again, those are pretty heavily tied in with the government. So then that begs the question, why is it the ones that are most heavily regulated also the ones that aren't open to this? So I think that like, if you ask them, you're going to get the political answer, right? Problems with electrical and wiring and mold and this type of thing and so forth. But I mean, I think you could argue there's a lot of things that people install in their homes that could be a lot more worrisome.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like, how many people have seen that really, really terribly installed saunas in homes, and you start to wonder about the impact of that. You know,
like,
what I mean?
oh, look at this great feature, and you're like, oh,
yeah,
no.
I built this sauna.
A moist box.
Moist. Whoa.
Yeah.
I did it, guys. I used the word moist again. I haven't done that for a few.
Yeah.
Oh boy. Okay, keep going.
Okay, so I want you to take off your mortgage broker hat for a second, and now you're going to put on your homeowner pug owning dad hat. If you moved into a home and you found out that there was a legal grow next door, and say you just moved in, you found the house, it's right, and it's a nice big property, and you found out after you moved in, shortly after, that the shed in the back of the neighbor's yard was actually a giant grow up. what would your initial reaction be?
If I could be honest with you, and I don't think anybody in the show except for you guys knows where I live, I think my neighbor does. So.
Oh, okay. How did you feel?
Is it legal? Is it not? I don't know. I don't care. I don't care.
Okay.
Don't really care. Nice family, great people. Every time he goes out, he asks me if I want anything in a nice way. Well, listen, like, it snowed today. He's like, man, I got extra salt. You want some salt? You know, and like just a super good guy.
That's how
right?
it starts. It's gateway salt.
It is not gateway salt. It is not gateway salt. It is snow salt. Come on.
Yeah.
No, but super good family, good people. I'm just kidding. I don't know if that is actually what's going on. They do definitely enjoy it. But that being said, like I said, the only thing that annoys me is the smoke, because I don't like. I don't care if it's pot or cigarettes or whatever. I'm just not a big smoke fan.
You're like, this is a pungent aroma.
Yes. So I've walked over and said, here's a 6-pack, my man. Drink this for a bit and stop smoking. And he was laughing his butt out, and he stopped smoking outside for a bit. So it was good.
That's great.
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, it's going to be subjective to who you are and the relationship that you have with people. You know, I think I'm the kind of person that I would just walk over and say hi and talk to somebody. So it's probably less of a concern with me, but you can also get a good judge of character when you openly get to meet people and see who they are as well.
Yeah.
Perhaps if there was an unsavory family and I went over and they were unable to communicate, that might be a different situation, but this wasn't the case.
So it seems to be like it's definitely probably more accepted, and obviously we understand that people do grow their own at home.
Sure.
And I think you're right. So it's respecting, neighbor boundaries with regards to smoke, and I guess it's more like people dependent, because even in my situation, it was more about who is that family next door, or is it undesirables, or is it or like, because you're saying you get to know your neighbor and you realize no, like that's not an unsafe situation. I don't have to worry about anything. So that kind of changes things, I think. Anyway,
I think it also says a lot about the person. You're asking me. I'm the kind of person that I'm going to try not to judge anybody. If someone just looked at these people, they might think they were harsh, but there's just, everybody has a different way of looking, if you will, and they are exceptionally warm and welcoming, because I kind of came in that way. What if someone was more threatening and nervous and scared? Maybe there's a different type of reaction or feeling. So I think maybe that's just a general conversation around how to be around people.
Yeah. Okay. I like it. And have you ever purchased a grow op property personally yourself?
I have not.
And would you ever?
Sure. Yeah. If it was the right property, yeah, I would. Again, situation dependent.
Of course.
Would I not buy something purely because of that? No, but I'm a real estate investor. So I'm the kind of person that if it made sense, if it was a tool that I could use and or a great piece of real estate, property, land, location, whatever, why would you zero it out? I wouldn't lean towards it for sure. And the cost of borrowing when it's a number situation impacts the decision more than anything else. Right. So I think more than anything else, that would just purely come down probably to the numbers.
So interest rates, they're higher with grows, or are they?
So there's a lot of confusion around how that works. Typically, so I'll just start with typically, because I start with a baseline and then there's obviously pros and cons. So the typical lender will charge what's called a premium or a surplus, no different than anything else. So with a normal mortgage, a lot of people think that interest rates are just kind of black and white. Here's the rate you get.
Right.
But once you start to add on the toppings, little I guess not Subway, but pizzas, you add on the toppings is a little bit more expensive, right? Yum, hungry. You have little surpluses on interest rates, right? So typically you'll see that a lender would charge somewhere between 0.5%, maybe 1% more on an interest rate for what's called a risk premium. Okay. And although that's not always the case, that's most frequently what you will see.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's super interesting. So what we're seeing is homeowners that are getting caught between, what the banks allow, what the government says they allow, what they want to do. And it can be very tricky for people. So if you are considering getting a mortgage on a property, talk to Alex first. We can link his information to the bottom of this podcast. We will make sure that we put a picture of your pug.
Definitely. And I help people who aren't buying grow ops too. So
Yes. For any mortgage
as a quick
needs.
reminder reminder. I think we've done 3 in the last 3 years. So
Okay. Wow. Okay.
it is not frequent. Like I said, it will be more questions than actually people fulfilling going through with it. And we're talking about, I've helped literally thousands of people in the last number of years, right? And so you will get a lot of these questions. Like you'll definitely get the questions.
People curious about it.
Yeah, and I always tell people to get independent advice. You know, if you're not sure, talk to a lawyer, do some research, run your numbers, see where you're comfortable with. Just give yourself a little bit of time to make a decision, right? So we know people who have purchased them directly. I've helped families purchase them directly, and I would suggest that the people that I followed up with are happy with their purchase. Like they're not unhappy with it. Most of them are like, yep, I knew what I was doing when I got into it. I think the only people that might feel unhappy about it are either
surprised.
Yeah, like surprised by it, or like maybe they didn't talk to someone who gave them the whole picture of like what happens in 3 years if I try to refinance. Well, you're going to have X cost, right?
Right.
Or maybe someone buys a reload house. That could be a problem, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, so that's always my first. I'm always like, oh,
that's your first concern. You're like, okay,
who was in here?
Yeah, it hasn't happened though. I've never seen that. So at least not me.
Good. Okay. Okay. So before we conclude our episode, I have one question to ask you. It is not mortgage or grow up related. I want to know, out of your 3 pugs, which one is your favorite?
Whoa. So hold on a second here. This is edgy now. So we're entering.
Jeremy's losing it.
We're going past acceptable territory. This is like asking who's your favorite.
You have
child.
to answer.
Well, listen, Chewy is my current favorite.
Chewy's your current favorite.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I will tell you that, I've got the old love for Ernie, even though he's crusty and decrepit, he looks like a potato and he stinks. And he literally is a squeeze and fart. And then Jax, come on, Jacques.
Yeah.
Like every time I call him Jacques,
so
he just
sweet.
looks at me and he just looks so inviting.
He just wants to be petted.
Just wants to be touched.
Yeah.
So Jacques and I have grown closer in my days. I think I've just got puppy love for Chewy right now. That's the most important thing.
Okay.
So,
well, that was a good question to end on. Thank you so much for coming out. That's all the tea spilling of this episode. Hopefully, if you're listening, you learned something. And cheers until next time.
Cheers.
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 Thank you for listening to Spilling the Tea, a real estate podcast with Kristy Macero and Shelagh Macek.